Hello everyone. I am back with Dimitri Bianco, our YouTube Quant extraordinaire. And I wanted to have this discussion with him because what he said in his post kind of reflected on some of what my students have been telling me in terms of what's going on in the world of quant and where the opportunities might be lying. I mean, historically it was, hedge funds and credits and big companies and big bulge bracket, but it feels that something is going on in the market. And I don't know, maybe, Dimitri, tell us a little bit what happened and what's driving it.
Okay. I'll try to give you a little perspective on this. So
Sure.
It seems, so I took a job, everyone knows, 2.5 months. I worked at this company. I just up and quit and left the whole thing. There was a big blow up with it. And so everyone assumes it started with just one bad experience here, but this isn't really what's driving, I think, a lot of the resignation, a lot of the frustration on the banking side from quants. And it's not just me. Like, I feel like I'm like this damaged good here. And yet I'm going out talking to all my friends, these other banks, and they're saying the industry's broke. There's a lot of issues with it. We don't know how to fix it. A lot of students are getting feedback from alumni as well saying, like, don't go into banking. There's a lot of issues with this.
Yeah.
And I think it starts a lot with the fact that the banks aren't quant ran anymore. And so when you're at a firm and you have responsibility and you have some improvements to make, right, everybody wants to jump in and be a part of the team. And I think this started off my career well, where I started on a team that had no implementation team. So they just brought me in and said, Dimitri, I'm the new head of implementation. You're the first hire. Figure something out, right? You're the guy to make it happen. And so I built that out. And then, of course, as they got mature and the bank kind of got stabilized a little bit, I trained another guy there. Then it was like, it's time for me to jump to something new. So I ran over to BCG. I worked there for a little bit, 3.5-month contract there. Similar story, right? You get in, you make a big impact. Then you start hitting a lot of barriers. Some people kind of jump ship, went to Santander, had a great and amazing time there. Amazing leadership, CEO, amazing head of validation. We were just really hitting strides. Like, we had problems left and right. Like, that was the fun part of the whole scenario. But as soon as you start cutting out the senior managers, they leave, they go to other banks. There's this really big push, I think, for most of these firms to somehow get rid of risk management. And so now I'm taking time off from this last explosion of, they hired me to come in and fix things. I was hired to take them from an FDIC level bank to an FRB, so Federal Reserve Board bank. Dimitri, please help us, please come. And I said, okay, if you're looking for someone to toe the line, just kind of hang out and get paid like everybody else is doing around the industry, I'm not your guy. Like, don't hire me, don't bring me in, I'll stay where I'm at. They said, no. The CRO, the head of enterprise risk management, and their head of validation were all like, no, we need you to get in here and help us out. We don't want to shake things up too much, but kind of guide us and kind of help us. And then turns out that's not what they really wanted. They didn't really want to communicate either. I'm like going to my boss's office every single, week, multiple times saying, there's this new plan. Here's how we can adjust things. And then it really backfired when basically I was sitting down with my boss and I was told I was arrogant. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm underqualified. You don't really have experience working in big banks. And yet I'm scratching my head looking at the rest of senior management going, wow, the rest of you have zero experience in a big bank. You haven't done this before. And now somehow I went from the golden child is going to help you guys fix things to now I'm kind of on the bottom end of I know nothing and I'm unqualified to do this. And so part of this was I was told that for model development, you're never going to get them on board, right? They're these horrible people. They're creating this big kind of stir with us. You're not going to be able to fix them. And within a few weeks, I convinced them, hey, we need to get on one system and one plan. And again, I'm excited here, right? We have hurdles, we have difficult people, we're solving problems quantitatively, we're moving to this better system. And then again, it rocked the boat too much. And so that's where it kind of came down to this meeting where, unfortunately, in an unprofessional manner, it was, Dimitri, you either sit down and shut up, don't make any changes, don't tell us anything, just pretend, that you're an employee on the bottom level, or you can quit. So you make the decision, you have till Monday to do it. And then I quit. And then I think they were shocked. The guy and I quit kind of scooted back and was silent. And was like, I wasn't expecting you to quit. It's like, I don't need your money, right? Everybody's got money, every bank, every hedge fund, people will pay you to work. And I think that's kind of the key driver. So now I've decided, okay, I've been in the fire too long here. I've been battling bank after bank after bank. I think it's time just to stop and think about what's really causing this issue. Why does this seem to be a problem I'm having? Why is this a problem that other quants are having? And how do we fix this? And I think that's been the key conundrum here. And I think a lot of it just comes to the fact that there's one, risk management is a massive joke, I think, in a whole term. Somehow regulators have convinced banks what we're going to do is we're not going to have, risk and return, which we all learned in Finance 101, but magically all the business people forget after the class ends. But you have a CFO who's managing profits, right? Their goal is to maximize profits for the bank. And then we magically create a separate person called risk, who's not really in the same conversation with the profits here. And we're trying to pretend they're two different things. And so then I'm starting to go through this and I'm thinking, should I make videos revealing some of these issues? For example, you go and look at CROs across the industry. How many of them have a quantitative background? Less than 75%, or more than 75%. Then you look at heads of validation, heads of model development, which are two quant teams. How many of them have quantitative educations? Again, hardly any. And then you start thinking, okay, education doesn't matter. Let's say they're really good, they're really bright, and you start looking at their backgrounds. Where have they been working at? And you're like, oh, you've worked in loans and lending, or you've worked in, I don't know, customer service, for example. I've seen people in customer service roles, but they've climbed these hierarchies, and now it's like, I'm friends with this person, they need a job, the Federal Reserve and the FDIC are mandating we have chief risk officers. Let's just put friends of friends into these roles and let's hope everything works out well. And so the larger banks, I think, are doing a better job because they're solely dependent on these models. I mean, you can't make 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 loans and have a business person underwrite the loan. You need a model to do it. So they're utilizing these models more so. But the smaller the banks, the more disconnected it is, where it's like you have a model, we're not making money with it. It's just there as like a nice, pretty facade of like, hey, regulators, look, there's a model here. We don't understand it. We don't use it. It doesn't perform well, but I paid $2 million for FICO or someone to build it, or Moody's, please go away. And I think this is kind of the crux of the whole problem, which is the quants are leaving. They're not coming into the industry. One of the shocking statements I heard was, other banks aren't training employees, so why would we? And I'm coming into these institutions saying, let's train people, let's team people up, let's make it better and more quantitative and fun. And then at the same time, you're getting pushback from these finance and business professionals on, we don't need complicated models, or we don't need training, or we don't want to cater to the quants. We just want you to build something, pretend it's there, and kind of go away.
They don't understand what they don't understand it. And I don't know if it has changed a lot. I mean, when I was in banking, we used to protect the portfolio, and it was always, well, why are we spending so much money? I mean, this is such a waste. So they don't understand. And that was before 2008. And then of course, 2000 hit. Whoa. Okay. So yeah, but you know what? You're hedging, you're protecting for that downside, which could take everyone. Well, look what's happening now, which could take everyone down very quickly. And what you said is interesting, because recently I've had discussion with some of my students that have gotten jobs, and they're kind of saying, this is a great, nice and cushy job, but is this going to be fun to do?
Right. And I think when we define fun to do, I had a CRO mention to me, he goes, I don't understand these quants. He goes, they don't want more money and more time off. They're wanting like research opportunities. Yeah. They want to learn things. I mean, who wants to learn things? I can give you more money. And I'm looking at them like, we need to embrace this. These guys want to work more for you for the same money, for the same time off.
Yeah.
And yet that doesn't seem to be the goal with it. It baffles me. But at the same time, I think there's this toxic circle, which I've kind of been looking at now too, which is, so you hire a bunch of people not qualified to build models. So you have a bunch of junior guys, they just don't have the expertise or experience. So you put a head of, model development in there. I don't know, he comes from a finance background or sales background or something. And then he builds really crappy models. They try to sell them to the business unit. The business looks at him and says, I can't use these. These don't work. These models are terrible. And so then the business says, all models don't work. I've already hired, we've already spent $2-3 million on quants. They came in and built these terrible models. the models don't work. And then the quants are stuck and they're saying, well, no, we have models. And you have this circle where it's like the business doesn't trust the quants. The quants are mad the business isn't using the models and they can't give the feedback to explain why the model doesn't work. And so you're kind of stuck in this paradigm where it's like you don't have the expertise for someone to come in and say, look, this is why it's not working. Let me help you guys. Let's work together as one team. And again, teaming that together. How are we splitting the profit business making from the modeling such that the two halves aren't working together?
This is not new, because I remember my former boss actually had left our outfit, and he had given this opportunity to work in a portfolio management risk. And he was always concerned, are they, and it wasn't the same type of bank. It was more of a bit of a situation that you described. And he went there and he had the mandate and a great opportunity for a while. But then I checked back with him a few years later and he was gone. So and I know the guy, and pretty bright guy, quant in mind. And I realized that what he wanted to do, I don't think they didn't have the mindset to do it. And when you're telling me what you're telling me, it sounds so familiar. And then what you also said is true, because the same students that are telling me I'm not so sure about these jobs is because they're the one that I work on 2 and 3 projects, quant projects, where they built, great things, and they work on blockchain, they work at a bunch of different things. And now they say, okay, now I'm going to get a job and I'm going to get paid for it.
Yeah.
And then realize, well, no, you're not going to be doing all these great things. You're going to be, in this cubicle, and you're going to be doing these things that they want you to do. And you realize, well, so where is the opportunity then for real quants to, unless you go back to hedge funds, but on the risk side, where is it? I heard there's lots of interesting stuff going on the West Coast. A lot of my students are getting jobs in smaller firms. And I find that the better, more interesting projects tend to be with smaller firms as well, not with a large one, because whenever I approach I approached one of the large bulge bracket with projects, we say, well, I don't know, we got some compliance issue, who's going to take care of the data and the legal implication? I don't know. And you know what, it's okay. We'll just hire them when so what are we talking? We're talking geographically West Coast, smaller companies. What do you think?
So I think you have a size factor, as we're kind of pointing out here, but you have you have a problem and a benefit with this, right? So small firms, like when I started my first job, I remember talking to the guy in the finance department, and he was telling me this story. He goes, when DFAST and CCAR hit, he goes, there were no PhDs, there were no masters.
CCAR, yeah, that was the thing, yeah.
So he goes, so I came in, I got a finance degree, and I put it all in Excel, and I drew some lines on the chart, and we submitted it. And he goes, and then the Fed comes back and says, are these statistically significant? Are the residuals normal? And he goes, I don't know what this guy's talking about. He goes, I don't do statistics.
Statistical.
And so when I think when these problems are new, and I think CECL, for example, is impacting a lot of the smaller banks. So they're trying to get on board. Smaller banks give you typically more responsibility because there's less people, there's less layers. They have these newer problems. And you get really lucky if the small bank allows you to solve the problem and doesn't interfere too much. But then you have, I think, the other issue, which is big banks typically understand quants better in the sense that they understand why they need the model, right? They're generating billions and trillions of dollars in loans here. And so they need a model to automate a lot of this, to price everything out, to do it efficiently. And so the big banks understand it a little bit better, which is great. But then a small bank, for example, it's like, are you going to get the opportunity, to do good projects? And so I think you have a risk there where it's like, if you want something, you want to be impactful, you want an interesting project, go to the small firms. But at the same time, if you want to be understood a little bit better, treated a little bit better, often the bigger firms have more layers of protection. Like when I worked in big firms, my boss's boss, typically we had a nice shell of I don't know, call it like the insanity or the stupidity shell, where they would fend off the nonsense we would deal with senior management. And so you had kind of this nice little environment. But again, you typically don't get interesting projects because, there's 100 quants or something that are fighting over the same projects here. And then on the same token, the second piece I think is I think DeFi is starting to play a role into this. And I'm fairly against DeFi for a lot of reasons, but I think the big advantage with it, and I'm hoping the DeFi community figures this out, you're a bank with no regulations at this point. So instead of doing what the big banks are doing, which is like bowing down to the Federal Reserve and just going through the motions, not really managing risk, just trying to pass regulations without getting MRAs, so matters requiring attention. This is the opportunity for you guys to show and say, hey, we understand there's like fraud risk, and we understand there's terrorist financing risks, and we're going to come up with a more creative solution to solve these instead of doing the traditional method that all the banks are doing. And I think this is where the pocket is, and I think eventually, regulation is going to hit this DeFi community. But I think this is the time for them to run wild and really find better solutions, better automation, before they get sucked into the Federal Reserve and the FDIC, where they come in and mandate you must do these methodologies and these tools to solve your problems. So I think it's a hot topic in the sense that you'll have more freedoms. You don't have the regulations, but at the same time, I think the smart DeFi firms are going to start bringing in some risk practitioners to figure out how do we cope with these when they do hit, and how do we come up with more creative solutions to solve them.
So that's an opportunity then.
Right. Yeah, it's an opportunity, and I try to explain it to a lot, because there's a lot of people that are like me. I'm a little weary of DeFi. I start mentioning how are you going to prevent terrorist funding? I mean, Russia's a perfect example right now. You have the Russian-Ukraine war. Are they able to use Bitcoin and Ethereum? And if they are, who's stopping that funding and who's stopping that financing? I mean, these are complicated problems. It's not as simple as you pick up your phone or something and grab the GPS and say, we're going to block everybody in a specific region. And especially when you deal with countries like Russia's smart. It's not like they're 50, 60 years behind in technology. They understand how to set up locations, and they understand how to get around systems and do hacking. And so I think these are kind of the new interesting problems to think about from these firms, is how do we avoid some of this conflict that's coming up?
So, so we're looking. So if you're looking for a direction, so you're looking at a small firms, more likely. DeFi is not out of the question. So I do have a couple of DeFi projects, and some of the one soon actually got a job in a firm, a blockchain firm, with that in mind. So that would make sense. But so then there's nothing going on in the big firms anymore, like the JP Morgan and the Goldman Sachs for Quant.
There is, and I think if you're going to do it, probably the more interesting route is to look for data science roles. So some banks are combining them with quants, but now a lot of them, I think like JP Morgan, for example, is splitting them out. So if you want that exciting NLP project, or you want to explore, decision trees and neural networks within credit scoring or market risk, oddly enough, they've started to split these. So I think the route to go is go to these banks, search for data science roles, and apply for those. They're a lot more interesting, I think, than doing the traditional day-to-day credit risk, market risk. These banks think they've got it figured out until, of course, the crisis hits, and then the quantum.
So that means you have to be even more due diligent in terms of your networking, right? Because you got to get to that person or that group, and then you need to understand what that group does, especially when you start, data analytics, and you have to really know. So you have to take it. You can't just say, I'm going to work and then boom, I'm going to graduate. Bam, I'm going to Goldman. Yeah, I'm going to be a quant at Goldman. But doing what exactly? Or being a quant? I know that the firm that I was at, I heard recently that they're doing away with the whole risk analytics, right? And I remember we used to have these guys. We used to have the Fed coming in every week, right? Not they really understood what was going on, but they were there. And you're right. You have this show and tell. So if you're in that group that does a show and tell, then sure, you're coming in with all these bright ideas and say, well, calm down. I don't think we got discovered. We don't need, in fact, you're making too much noise now, because we don't want. So you need to either go into a big firm, but really tailor and really know who it is that you, and unfortunately for a big firm, it's a lot more difficult to develop the network because
Mm.
especially you coming out on the, out of school, unless you really took your time to hit the right areas, you're probably going to be in a lower, and you really don't know what's going on in terms of the strategy. So yeah, you're getting paid. Well, like they told you, what's your big deal? You're getting paid.
Yeah. Yeah. Show up and collect the paycheck. I mean,
Sure. What are you doing? What are you like? But I have students that are telling me, I'm not so sure if I really want this. I mean, so it's either you really have to take your time to network at the right level in a big bank, and that's a job in itself, or you go the smaller firm because you talk to the principals, and they're doing some. I tell you, they're doing some of the smaller firms are doing some really interesting work from what I've seen. But it's a smaller firm, so and then it's probably easier to understand what's really going on. Besides, you have to do some networking. Um, but you bring up the fact that DeFi has a lot to do with it. So there's that angle as well. So
right.
there's a okay.
And even the big banks now, they're doing DeFi. It's not being publicized as much. I mean, even I think like if you Google Santander, Ethereum contract or smart contract, you'll see in Europe they've already done a few of them
Mm-hmm.
at actual markets. So they have teams doing this, but then you end up kind of back on what we're talking about. You need to know the structure of the bank to figure out which department is doing the interesting work and then apply to that department, because now they're just going to blanket you anyways, right? You're all quants, you all work in model development, you all work in
Yeah.
validation,
Yeah.
but it's really these guys are doing something new and exciting here. Like they don't even know where they're going. I mean, ML and machine learning and all, it's probably the best idea here. The Fed is doing the typical approach, which I don't like, which is we're not going to provide guidance. We'll let you guys figure some things out. We'll see which bank does it the best. And then we'll say, that's going to be the new standard here.
Well, that's what they did when they came up with the Volcker rule. They say, you're not allowed to profit from short-term trades. And I remember went to legal. I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, I'm not so sure what they mean by short-term. So basically, they let you out.
Yep.
You guys find out and let's see what you come up with. Is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? Is it a year? What is short term? And they're still doing they're still doing that. So to back to the students though, as they're about to graduate, so they really need to spend more time now, I think, on the networking and really understanding what the market is as well. The market, that's tough to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're hitting on a good point too. Even from the investing side, you think about, I'm talking to people and they say, I'm going to go in the investing side, I'm going to go in the hedge funds.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm starting to realize too, you have to network a lot and really get into the nitty gritty details, because everybody's blanketing these quant terms here, right? It's really exciting to be a quant at a firm. And yet you have to do your research, because some firms think quant means, using, I don't know, an OLS regression or simple model. It's got one or two factors. And then you've got other firms that are doing like, actual research, and they're doing machine learning research, or they're building full out, statistical models with a lot of oversight and a lot of testing. And even on that stand, it's hard because you can work at one firm that's a small firm and you're not really a quant and you're bored because you're basically using Excel and other tools. And then on the flip side, you could be working at a really complicated firm, a small firm again, but a really complex, interesting, well-developed firm. And again, I think it comes down to that networking of trying to figure out like, what is this firm really doing on the inside? And what is the management really like, right? Are they giving you the resources to do this in the time? Or are they just hand waving and trying to kind of stamp on there, we've got a few quants because it looks fun and flashy? Like, so even on the investing side, the DeFi on this, I think there's some firms out there that are doing amazing things. They're doing a lot of research, really, changing how things are done. But then you also have a lot of guys that are just creating fun gambling tokens and thinking it's, adding some value.
So so at the end of the day, it's always back to the to the most important thing in terms, do you have management buy-in?
Right. And that's really hard to judge.
But that's a problem, right? The only way the only time we did some interesting stuff is when we had management buying. Everybody from management to senior management, okay, you go out and take some positions or start hedging or invest and hedge and combine and do a bunch of balancing. But as long as you have the buy-in, but the only thing is you coming in, you don't know really what's going on. I mean, yeah, you're getting paid, but you don't know if you have the buy-in or not. And if you don't have the buy-in and something, so it's not like you're doing lending, right? It's not like you're doing credit analysis. Quant is, I mean, it's a bunch of different things to different people. I mean, somebody actually asked me, he said, well, what's the difference between what you're doing, right, in financial engineering and fintech, right? I said, well, the math, I think, right?
Yeah.
Where you could be working with a company that lends to tech companies and financing those tech companies. But here, the math is a difference. And as opposed to an MBA or as opposed to something else. So we have, and this is what's good, which is now realize it's not so good anymore because we have a finance, math, engineering. So you get a bunch of different jobs, which is great. I mean, I got students working all over the place. The only thing is obviously now they start to wonder, well, do I need to go for a big firm or a small firm? Because now with a big firm, it's getting a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And I think one way kind of to address this from a student perspective.
Yeah.
Go online. This is the firm you're applying to. Search whoever is the head of the department. So if you're in risk, who's the CRO? Even looking at like the CEO, what is their background?
That's a great idea.
Because when I go out there and I find people and I know people in the industry and they've got physics undergrad, engineering, PhDs and things, and I talk to them and they're adding what we're talking about. They're adding the support. They're on for the initiatives. They're doing groundbreaking things. And I think, unfortunately, the battle we're really having in finance now is finance and business doesn't want to give up their role as head of banks anymore. They know they don't have the skills to do it, but they're going to, hang on to every last thread. And the quants are just saying, I just want to do something interesting. I just want to solve problems. And the business side sees it, I think, but they're like, how do we allow them to solve the problems without giving them the credit? Because eventually people will realize we don't need, a CFO with an accounting background or a finance background. We probably should get rid of a CRO position and make the CFO a quant to kind of lead these initiatives.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is three things. One, make sure if you go for a large company and you want to be a quant, network heavily to make sure you know exactly where you're going to land. Two, very true, find out who's in, I mean, that's not hard to find out who's in charge and look at their background. Are they quants? Do they have a math degree, or is it, an MBA, or they work in operations and they just move their way up? I mean, doesn't mean that they're not a quant, but it gives you an indication. And three, do look at the possibility of looking at a smaller company somewhere else, out of the beaten path, things that you don't always hear, because these companies, they don't have FaceTime with universities, right? You got the bulge bracket, you got the big accounting firm. They're always on campus saying, hey, super day. But the smaller one, where maybe the more interesting work is being done, you never hear from them. You don't even know they exist. You talk about NLP, you're talking about all these things.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that we had to look far and wide to find companies interesting in this type of stuff. And I'll tell you, once we find them, yes, it's very interesting for the student. Of course, now I want them to go out and keep doing the same thing, not end up in these big, humongous companies with the manager that has no direction, or at least no, where you don't know and then they get disappointed very quickly. And I've seen it happen very often. Where they get into investment banking, which whatever that means anymore, and they get bored very quickly. And I often ask them, I said, hey, so how much of your skill set did you use in your current job? And often it's, well, not, I need a job, so not really. And that's a shame, because now you could have done something else and you didn't really have to suffer 2 years of math and statistics.
And oddly enough, just as a hiring perspective, when I was at a small firm hiring, I'd go to universities and say, hey, I'm looking for someone with these backgrounds. Most of the time, no one would respond. And I was like shocked. Like I remember in school, like as a student, I'm desperate for a job.
Yeah.
It always seemed like the
Yeah.
universities were trying to bring in these companies. And then as I'm emailing out, all these big universities around, like I need someone with this background, I need a quant skill, and explaining the whole thing. People just ghosted. It was like I never existed.
No, well, they don't work that way. They work the other way around. You come in and tell us what you have, and we'll just send the people, and they'll decide. But now you
Yeah.
want me to know what every single student is able to do. And I tell you from a personal experience, it's a difficult. I mean, we don't have 100 students, but if I
Yeah.
had 100 students, I wouldn't be able to say, "Hey, Dimitri, what are you looking for? Somebody good in Python and doing this and that, and talk to this girl or talk to that guy." But how could you everyone know all the students to that level of detail? Unfortunately, that's very difficult. But that's the way it should be, really.
Yeah. And I was hoping even just like a blanket email, just like send it out to the students and say, hey, this guy's name is Dimitri Bianco. He's hiring for this role. If you're interested, please let him know. Nothing. Nothing.
Well, these are large organizations. Well, hopefully, well, you get to do speeches. You get to enjoy yourself a little bit. I think that's good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm enjoying the time off. I'm still building the massive garage project that got postponed last year. Focusing on YouTube, doing presentations at a variety of universities. So it's been a good use of time.
You know what you should do? You should create your own ranking system.
I've got one.
I know. I see it. I see it.
Yeah, it's
But develop it.
Yeah. Yeah, that in itself is super hard. I had a discussion with Peter Carr on this, and it's so hard to figure out how do you differentiate programs. Because right, everyone has kind of a similar goal. We want to generate quants. But then you have to start thinking like we're talking about here. So what's really the skill set you need to be a quant? And are you wanting to go into fintech or DeFi or data science? And are you offering all those courses? And how do you differentiate programs in general? Like, for example, it'd be great to be able to verify the information, like where are the students being placed? But I get the privacy thing as a student too. I don't want my name being sent out to all these ranking things saying, Dimitri Bianco is unemployed or he went to this firm or
Yeah.
that firm. But yeah,
But I like your approach that you have on your current ranking, which is you actually went and kicked the tires
oh yeah,
and looked at the program as opposed to saying, okay, how much are you getting paid? What is a GPA? But then again, you could rank 200 companies that way, right?
yeah,
Because you just get the data and but does this represent, is this really a quant? I mean, you could be making, the kind of money that you're supposed to be making as a financial engineer or quant, but is this, is this a quant job?
right. And you're hitting on the hardest point for me, which is how do you review a lot of programs and do it well? And I found out, I thought like, oh, this won't be too bad. I'll send out some questionnaires. I'll talk to some universities, but it's a lot of work of getting into like, I had a list originally, a short one. And I was like, I'm going to expand this probably. I'm going to double this, but I'm going to at least set the targets low. And then once I started trying to email people, follow up with information, talk to students, alumni, all that.
It takes
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah, the workload.
And frankly, at the end of the day, and something that I've learned is that, yeah, the curriculum is one thing, but they kind of tend to be all the same. I think that what you mentioned about, well, what do these people actually end up working?
Yeah.
And also, what else are you offering in terms of project work, in terms of internship, in terms of student development? Because I tell you, a lot of students, they're coming in, they say, okay, where's the classroom? Let me start cracking the books and get my GPA up there.
Yeah.
And I tell them, listen, no. I mean, this is okay, but that's half of the battle. The other battle, especially now after our discussion, is you need to intern. You need to do networking, find out where these people are doing, who's in charge, and what are they going to do, and what are you going to do? Because yes, you're going to get a job, but is it the job that you want? Then you're going to feel bad. You'll be surprised that happens. So it's the curriculum, it's the networking availability, it's probably the location of the place, it's the projects you get involved, it's there's a bunch of other things.
Yep.
But to rank something like that.
And from a program perspective, I understand the student view of like, why don't they just provide, all these great resources? And then when you get out, you start realizing like it's hard to find people who can help with that. And then also the amount of time it would take, like even like we were talking about on the past, putting like the curricula or the syllabus for each class up. It seems like a simple task, but then if you have how many classes, how many professors you got to follow up with, then you got to make sure you have the most up to date one. Then you got to post it online. Like I get it now from a after a student position. Now I get all the work that goes into these programs behind the scenes.
Oh
It
yeah,
is,
no, no, it's not just teaching,
yeah,
and then of course you got to get the right student for it, which is not always the student that gets the great grades is not always a student that works best with others and
mhm.
that could network appropriately and find the right opportunity. So it's not a mass market. It's a very niche. If you do want to do it well, it's interesting as well, but it's a very niche market, and you have to really take your time. So great! Oh my God, we're going to starting another topic here. Uh, let's go back to Dimitri. Anyway, so hopefully everything turns out all right for you. Ultimately, I mean, it's stuff to take some time off anyway. To
Yeah, yeah,
and you should do speaking engagement. I'm telling you, I mean, you could definitely get speaking engagement for lots of universities and that they want to hear things, what you have to say. I think if they know, again, if they know what the topic is.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
Great. Well, thanks again for your time. It's always a pleasure here, and let's see what happens next.
All right, thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks.